The US presidential election is 35 days away. Over the next month, Strategy Aaron will mostly be focusing on American politics and foreign policy. Kicking things off is today's interview with Ryan Fecteau. He is the youngest and first openly gay Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. We followed each other on Instagram for a while now, and I was eager to get him on the show. Among his achievements are more affordable housing in Maine, a COVID patient's Bill of Rights, and passing a conversion therapy ban in the state. We talk about how he did it, as well as, of course, the state of the presidential election. A lot of polls in key swing states are worryingly tight, so Ryan and I discuss what some voters might be quote-unquote undecided about. And as we touch on Tim Walz and JD Vance, I decided to bring out this episode Tuesday ahead of the debate. I hope you enjoy our conversation. Ryan, thank you very much for being a guest.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
What is your favourite word?
I've prepared for this, so I know right off the top of my head it's going to be pizza, because who doesn't love pizza?
Nice. I got a free one from Domino's the other night because the last one I got was delayed over an hour, so they gave me a free one.
See? And no one. I think the next best thing is free pizza. So,
what is your least favourite word?
I would say interesting, even though I used it a lot, but it's more of a filling word that doesn't have much significance typically, but people use it all the time.
What is your favourite curse word?
The F-bomb easily, so it's my go-to.
Are there any notable times in your career where you've used it?
Not in the public sphere, I can't imagine, but certainly often in other contexts.
What is your favourite book?
Ooh, good question. Good question. I would have to say, Ghost Set a Watchman, which is, I think, a little bit under the radar, but having read To Kill a Mockingbird in school, it kind of contrasts with that narrative when you have more of a more complex Atticus character in the non-published version of what may have been a sequel or a prequel or whatever. But I like the complexity added to his character than just person who's instantly noble and does all the right things.
Do you have any guilty pleasures?
Eating ice cream.
Nice. What is a sound or noise that you love?
Sound or noise that I love. That is a great question. Come back to me on that one.
What is a sound or noise that you hate?
Well, yeah, I guess during the legislative session, there's a ringing bell whenever we are coming in to vote, or during when we've taken a break and we need to get everyone back into the legislative chamber, and so that bell kind of haunts me. So I would definitely go with the bell that rings during the legislative session.
Who is a real life role model?
I think it's interesting. I've developed real life role models, I'd say, later on in life, particularly because didn't learn a lot about people who were LGBTQ leaders, for example, until much later. And so, I look at some people that have done notable things here in my own state, in Maine, or across the United States or globally. And I wouldn't say I have any particular one that really stands out, but cumulatively, learning about their work, learning about what they've done to advance civil rights, definitely has inspired me to do the work that I get to do every day.
Finally, is there a fictional character who you imagine yourself to be?
I thought about this one as well before coming on. It's an interesting question. It's hard to pinpoint someone who sort of is fictional that also reflects who I am in any way, shape, or form, or who I think about being in their shoes. But there's this film that I grew up with as a child, Andre the Seal, and I'm not the seal, but I would say I forget the little girl's name, but she kind of, well, it's also filmed in, or supposed to be filmed in Maine, and so I think I take a lot of her charisma and her willingness to go to bat for this seal that was causing havoc in the community and that people wanted to get rid of.
Sounds like a nice Jaws.
Exactly. Yes. It's the Jaws without blood.
Okay. So you were just 21 when you were elected to the Maine House of Representatives. When were you first drawn to politics, and what was it that kept you interested?
Yeah, so I first got involved was when I was in high school. There was an opportunity to serve on our school board as a student representative, and I have to this day no idea what possessed me to want to apply for that opportunity. And I think I was selected because the superintendent of the school system probably thought that I was going to be relatively quiet and sort of just observe and mind myself. But
that's always
as time progressed, I became a lot more vocal, and particularly because the high school I was going to was in really bad state of disrepair. It needed significant improvements to its physical infrastructure, and there was an opportunity with a mayor who was willing to support a substantial investment in getting that done, and that sort of sparked my political interest. I helped lead a group of students that almost led a mini campaign in our city to get that a ballot question approved to fund the improvements to the school at the tune of $34 million back in 2009. And we were successful, and the school is much better today than it was when I went there. And from there, the political interest was sparked.
Were there any inspirations at the time?
Probably not, because my politics were quite skewed back then. I was fairly influenced by my grandmother, who is a heavy consumer of Fox News and very conservative, or has been Republican basically, I think, from the moment she was able to register to vote. And so I actually interned on the John McCain campaign back in 2008, and so those were the influences I had at that time. My politics shifted, obviously, over time. But I think the record reflects a more positive image of John McCain these days than perhaps what was reflected of him back in 2008. That's for sure.
I mean, I used to be a conservative when I was younger, and the apologetic way I have to continually go back down.
I think it's safe if you're a John McCain conservative, or you were at least. Trump has certainly shifted what it means to be a Republican.
So in the general election that we just had, 22-year-old called Keir Mather became the youngest MP in Parliament. And whenever he's questioned or challenged on his age or his maturity, he sort of argues that young people should be represented as much as any demographic, and that there are social and economic issues that unite them with older people, and also that maturity is more of a mindset than the result of age. And I guess if you look at Trump, it's an example. What is your view now of sort of are the things you wish you knew then when you sort of went into elective politics? Are the things that you sort of a result of time or getting stuck into things when you did?
Yeah, I had certainly no idea how the legislature worked when I first got elected. I thought I did, but I quickly learned that there was a lot I did not know. But I also learned that it didn't really have anything to do with age, because my colleagues who were also first-term members, ranging the age spectrum, also did not know what they were doing. So we were on equal footing in that regard. I think the thing that I would have liked to know when I first got elected was really finding the people who are successful and sort of being a closer observer of what made them successful. Why were they able to get bills passed? Why were they able to build coalitions with, in some cases, with people who would normally be on the opposite side of the political spectrum? I learned that over time, but I certainly would have been far more effective from the beginning if I had known some of those things at the start. But like any profession, you have to there's some on the job training, and you can't really replicate it by just being told on a slideshow or having someone provide you with an oral presentation of how things work and how to be successful. You have to sort of make your own way, and I certainly did that.
I guess one of the examples of that is you passed a conversion therapy ban in Maine. Here in the UK, there have been promises to pass one for about 10 years now. We've had like one Conservative Prime Minister after another promising one, then going back on what their predecessor had promised, then reintroducing it. The last one, there was an attempt to exclude trans people from the ban. And now the new Labour government has introduced a new draft bill and is consulting on it. So I'm curious, what was your experience passing the ban in Maine?
Well, it was required multiple attempts in Maine. We started I actually started in my first term. There's a lesson learned right off the bat, which was, don't put a bill in unless you've spoken to the folks that you're gonna need in your corner fighting with you. And at the time, the folks working in the LGBTQ space were not ready for that bill to be submitted. And I respected their position and their perspective and ended up withdrawing the legislation my first term. In my second term, I was a little bit more stubborn. I told them that I really do want to move forward with this. I think we can find a path forward through divided government. We had a House of Representatives controlled by Democrats. We had a state Senate controlled by Republicans, and we had a Republican governor. But I felt confident we could get it passed in the House and in the Senate, and hope for the best with the Republican governor. And we put the bill forward. We passed it in the House. We did pass it in the Senate. And despite the fact that just a few weeks prior to our bill landing on the governor's desk, the New Jersey Republican governor at the time, Chris Christie, and the Republican governor in New Hampshire, Sununu, both had signed bans into law in their own states, Republican governors. So we felt hopeful. But unfortunately, the governor became the first in the United States to veto the legislation, and we were unable to override of the veto ultimately. So the effort died on the first attempt. But on the second attempt, when I came back in my third term, we were able to pass it, and thankfully had a Democratic governor. We actually had a Democratic trifecta, so it was fairly easy to get it passed through the House and Senate and then onto the governor. And on election night, when the Governor Janet Mills won, I actually went over, congratulated her, and I asked her if we could get conversion therapy banned in Maine. And she said, send it to my desk. And that's just what we did. And Maine became the 18th state in the nation to ban conversion therapy. We haven't had too many more states join us since then. I think 3 have passed bans. So we still have over half the states in the United States that have yet to ban the harmful, discredited, ludicrous practice of conversion therapy.
I'm curious what the opposition was from the LGBT community the first time.
It was really just having the bandwidth and having the folks that, it takes a lot to line up supporters and to have testimony from folks who were impacted, and making sure you're expending your political capital in a way where you have a chance of winning is important, because you could actually set back the effort later on if you don't do it successfully. And I think they really wanted to have the opportunity to pass legislation with enough support to at least get it through the Senate. And we just weren't ready to do that in that first term. We were able to do it in the second.
What was the environment like trying to get it through the legislature?
Yeah, so the first time it was challenging again because of the state Senate controlled by Republicans, but we were able to talk to a couple of Republican senators who we knew were more open-minded, who had previously shared the fact that they had LGBTQ family members that they loved, and we felt like they would be likely to be supportive of a policy that made sure that no one was told that who they are is wrong, and that someone who is issued a license to practice in the state of Maine was not using that license to then essentially commit child abuse to adolescents. And so we were able to convince I think 3 members ultimately in the Senate that we needed to, in order to establish a majority, and we were successful in passing it. There was a lot of time spent finagling with the language, and you quickly learn in the legislature that everyone cares a great deal about every word used. And one of the Republicans we had to convince was an attorney, so he especially cared about every word used in the bill. And so I spent a lot of time sitting down with him and walking through why each particular word was used in the bill, and why the bill needed to be the way it was, and that we couldn't compromise on this or on that. And ultimately, he was convinced to stick with us on the legislation. We also had some great support from Mary Bonato, who is an attorney. She lives here in Maine, but she was one of the attorneys on the case before the Supreme Court that legalized same-sex marriage. And so we had a pretty talented team around us, and Mary certainly deserves a lot of credit for the work she's done nationally to advance LGBTQ rights. She's, you talk about heroes, she's someone that I would consider a heroine for the work that she's done over the years to make sure we secure civil rights for LGBTQ people. And she's been just a tremendous champion.
You became Speaker of the House in Maine in 2020. And at the time when you did, sort of countries like the US and the UK were still trying to sort of combat COVID and escape rolling lockdowns. And COVID has always kind of interested me in the sense of it's probably the closest thing in recent history where it's almost been like a total war, in the sense that it's touched sort of every aspect of society in the way that something like a world war only ever does. So I'm quite curious what it was like being in a leadership role during that time.
Yeah, so when COVID started, we were still in session. I was assistant majority leader at the time. And I remember the speaker, we had a meeting in her office, and she said, there's reports of this virus that seems like it could be problematic. We don't have enough information yet to know what we're going to do with the legislative session, but our plan is to complete our work this week, and then we'll come back in. We'll meet over the weekend and reassess for what we do on Monday. Well, I think 6 or 7 hours went by. We met again, and very quickly we were putting together a game plan for how we could responsibly end the legislative session. I think we adjourned probably 2 days later without day. So Son and I, and having the legislative session end prematurely without even dealing with a budget, which was obviously significant because not passing a budget when you have revenue. It was a supplemental budget, so it was really just accounting for revenues that were not projected in the original budget, but still significant to walk away from that work. And so we did. We adjourned, and then we waited instructions from the governor and the folks at the CDC as it relates to how we are going to proceed with life from that point forward. And it was obviously a very challenging time to be an elected official because there's so much information, and people really want to have the latest info on what to do and how to handle their daily lives. Are they going to work? Are their children going to school? Can they go to the grocery store with a degree of safety, assurance that they will remain healthy? It was quite a challenging time, but also a really important time because so many people were turning to me as an elected official for my community as a source of information. and turning to me for help. I mean, one of the things that I quickly started doing was calling through older folks in my community to see if they needed any help, from going grocery shopping, getting brought to medical appointments, going to the pharmacy, all of these small tasks. Many folks in need of securing toilet paper, which was, as you might recall, a very hot commodity. So, just all these various tasks. And soon enough, I realized I also could not do it on my own. So I put a call out to action for folks in the community to help me. And we had a number of volunteers who stepped up and were helping bring folks to appointments. Again, doing grocery shopping, which was a primary task. There was one lady who I helped who was afraid to go in public transportation. She had cancer, and she had cancer appointments that she needed to go to, and I drove her to her cancer specialist several times during that period. And then the vaccine became available, and then it was coordinating and providing information on how to secure a vaccine, which was also at first controversial because we didn't think we had enough supply. And so there was like certain groups that could get it. I mean, all these iterations of what seems like forever ago now, but really was a challenging circumstance just because there was no playbook. There was no, hey, lawmaker, hey, community leader, in case of global pandemic, these are the things that you can do. You're sort of just making it up as you go. But it was also a heartening time in the sense that you saw communities coming together to respond to something so significant and that threatened the lives of people in our community, especially those who were already vulnerable to disease. The legislature then, of course, has to restart at some point, and we have an election during that first year of the pandemic. I get reelected, and I was at the time running for speaker. The previous speaker was termed out. She couldn't run again, and secured the nomination and ultimately got elected by my peers to serve. But now we're tasked with convening a 200-year-old institution, which I know is nothing in contrast to your institutions, but for us, obviously, it
could have been.
It could have been. That's fair. But based a lot of the practices based similarly on the ways in which lessons were learned, so they were adopted, and there was an expectation that this is the way we do things, and we've always done it this way. But the pandemic demanded of us to do things differently, and so we first and foremost knew that the legislative chamber was much too small to convene 151 House members plus staff in such a small space. So we had to find an off-site location, which was a convention center nearby, and we had to make sure that it was hardwired because we needed access to fiber internet and not just a Wi-Fi connection. There's like things that you wouldn't expect that we needed because our system needed to talk to each other. The system that we had in place at this temporary location needed to speak to the system that was at the State House. So there's just these crazy obstacles that you just don't necessarily ever anticipate being of concern. And ultimately we held our legislative session at this convention center for a number of months, eventually returned to the State House. We had a lot of our work went remote. So we were doing committee work via Zoom, things that, in technology integrations that we had not ever adopted. Like we had not used Zoom for committee meetings. We never had remote anything before the pandemic. And so all this, a lot of learning. I in some ways, maybe I was the right person at the right time, given my age and the fact that I wasn't terribly fazed by some of these things. But there was a learning curve for a lot of people to adopt the technology and to be able to utilize it. Now, with that being said, there were also some lessons learned, like the public had greater access to the legislative process. And so we had a lot more, I think, engagement from the public who no longer needed to travel long distances just to engage with the political process. And some of those things, like remote testimony, has remained in place, which I think is a huge benefit to the public and to the process to have more diversity of voices, more people involved in the political process. But it was challenging. We also had a requirement that folks wear a mask. And as you can imagine, that was controversial amongst some people. And we on the first day of returning back to the State House, a group of lawmakers came through security without wearing a face covering. And, I was put in a position of having to make a decision. What do you do to hold people accountable to the rules that we all agreed to? We agreed to these rules that we would wear a face covering, and now you're not following them. So many obstacles that you just don't necessarily anticipate. I should also mention that supplemental budget that we didn't pass when we abruptly adjourned. We needed to pass on the first day of when we got sworn in, and so you have a ton of new lawmakers. First day, they've just been sworn in, and now we're working on a budget that we need to pass immediately before adjournment. So that was a long first day. I think we were in session until like 3 a.m. passing a supplemental budget. So very strange times overall.
I mean, I do feel like many people have just collectively forgotten those whole sort of year or two. I was going to ask, are there any lessons that you sort of drew from that time in terms of sort of being a leader or being in a leadership role?
Certainly learned how to pivot and how to think outside the box and to overcome a lot of significant challenges from a operational perspective, how to make sure a large institution can still do its work, and also handle the myriad of personality challenges where you have people who don't necessarily feel like every aspect is being handled properly. And for every person you're satisfying, there's someone who's dissatisfied, and it can be challenging when your every move is sort of being critiqued by a larger group of people. And none of the decisions are easy because in an ideal world, you are operating in the way that we've always operated. We're doing the work, we're passing bills, we're working on legislation in the same ways we've always done it. But that just was not possible under those circumstances.
So obviously the general election is what everyone's worrying about. I lurch between hope and anxiety several times a day. My first two questions on this are: you were at the Democratic convention in August. What was it like?
The energy was tremendous. There was a lot of enthusiasm for Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. I think I think folks are just really excited to have a ticket that reflects America, that is positive, that has a vision for our country moving in a positive direction, and certainly in contrast to who's been nominated on the other side of the ballot. I think there couldn't be an easier question in my mind as to who should be the president, an easier answer to the question of who should be the president of the United States. Now, that being said, we know that the polling indicates that it will be a relatively close election, but it was a really captivating week, having a number of speakers from across the party, young people, folks who have been working at this for a long time, everyday people who are there to share their stories about how policies like Trump's position on abortion rights have impacted them or could impact other people. It really was a great way to make clear to the American people what Democrats are fighting for and who we are. I think now that being said, I should add we were all disappointed that Beyonce was not there. So I will say we were riding quite a high until the very end when the balloons dropped and still Beyonce was not on stage. But that's fine. That's fine.
You've also met Kamala Harris.
Yes.
What'd you like?
Very warm, very gracious. We had the opportunity to attend a holiday party that she hosted at the vice president's residence, and a very warm person. And I think just very, very kind to open her residence to the public and invite folks from across the country to share that experience. I mean, I've never been able to go there before. Certainly Mike Pence never invited me, so it was pretty awesome to be there.
I mean, so as you just said, that this election is going to be decided by a relatively small number of people in states like Arizona, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. I'm kind of like you, I'm perpetually amazed that there are people who are undecided about Harris and Trump. Nevertheless, they exist. What do you imagine that they are undecided about?
I mean, that's a good question. I can't imagine with a candidate on I mean, with President Trump, I mean, you pretty much should know everything you need to know about him at this point. But I think the challenge for a lot of people is that the election seems to be so much about the economy, and I think it is. I think people are concerned about just getting by every day, and it's become more and more expensive just to afford the basic things you need to survive. Having a house, paying for groceries, paying for transportation. And I think that is what leaves them with a question about whether or not President Trump would be better for the economy versus Vice President Harris. But I think if you look at sort of, and it's hard because it's sort of an emotional decision versus you can use all of the statistics in the world to try to convince people that actually the economy is improved and things are getting better, and inflation was largely a result of the pandemic, and so on and so forth. But people ultimately are voting as it relates to what benefits them. And I think that the case that Kamala Harris has to make to the American people is that she is actually the better person to address the challenges that they face in their everyday lives. And she's made that clear on a number of the positions she's taken. The child tax credit, which we had for a brief moment in time before it wasn't refunded, but the child tax credit eliminated a huge percentage of child poverty in this country, giving families a resource to afford everyday expenses like diapers and baby formula and many other things. Her position on addressing inflation through price gouging. I mean, you hear these executives bragging on their shareholder calls about the fact that they have leveraged the inflationary effects to get more money out of consumers and to raise prices. Vice President Harris has a track record of going after bad actors. When she was Attorney General in California, she talks about that as it relates to mortgage lenders who took advantage of people who were buying homes. She's talked about that as it relates to these for-profit colleges that were taking advantage of students and giving them junk degrees, essentially. So I think she has a good message. It's a matter of, in this short timeline, this compressed timeline she has to run for president, of making sure people understand that when it comes to the economy, the best person for the job is Kamala Harris, not President Trump.
You know, when you said about facts and emotions, back in 2016, during the Brexit campaign in Britain, I was very much one of those people who would angrily shout statistics at people for why Britain should stay in the EU. And then when it came to the US election, sort of angrily shout facts about why Trump wouldn't be a good president. And then I remember that John Lovett made a really good point. I think it was just after the 2016 election, which is knowing the difference between what offends people and what affects them. So a lot of people might be, or at the time, 2016, offended by things Trump might say, but not appreciate why it might affect them. And how his point at the time was sort of progressives need to get that second bit of tying the two together.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I mean, Maine has a unique experience as it relates to Trump-like figures, because we had a governor, Paul LePage, who was very much like Trump before Trump was even president of the United States. And I remember going to the barbershop and listening to, locals. I'm in a pretty Democratic community, historically has voted for Democrats. And, I'd listen to folks as I'm getting my haircut talking behind me. And, they're saying how offensive the governor is. I don't like what he says. I don't like how he says it. But, that big sort of exception to the rule is he is doing X, Y, Z. I like that he's done this, or that he's tackled the thing that I agree with. And so they're willing to excuse bad behavior because they feel like he was fighting for them or delivering on issues that they cared about, even if he wasn't, which, by the way, he really wasn't. But that didn't matter so much as if the feeling was he was out there doing the right things. And perhaps even the bad rhetoric, the inexcusable sort of tone in which he approached politics may have been another reason why they felt like he was actually taking on the fight, which I think is a similar effect that Trump has. I think people feel like his willingness to say it like it is actually him going against the institutions that have caused things to be the way they are. I just happen to think he's highly ineffective at what he does, and certainly his policies, when they actually are spelled out, as he's politely done with the Project 2025 document, you can see very clearly what he stands for is in complete contrast to what middle-class Americans are hoping their president and their government will deliver for them.
I mean, the Project 2025 thing, Keir Starmer, the new British Prime Minister, met Trump last night to try and establish a relationship. Recently, the new British Foreign Secretary told his European counterparts that there's a difference between what Trump says and what he does. It's the whole sort of don't take him literally, take him seriously kind of line. And something that I sort of struggle with is sort of, I understand the logic behind these actions, which is basically if Trump does win, then Britain, France, Germany are all going to have to deal with them. But on the other, when you sort of read the Project 2025 stuff, I don't think a lot of people in Europe don't really want to reckon with how dark things might get, how quickly in America.
Yeah, I think it really draws it. The Project 2025 agenda, which, the fact that they've even published this is kind of insane, but it is so transparent as to what the vision is that Trump and his allies, and certainly I think more so the people that he surrounds himself with, want to see enacted as far as policy and governance in this country. It's pretty dark, and it's a lot of it is embedded in Christian nationalist ideology, bringing religion so intimately into our governance. And I think for most Americans, if they understood the consequences of having religion so intertwined with public policy, I think they'd be horrified. And I'm grateful that Project 2025 has been published, because I think more and more people have been able to see for themselves what this president and his allies want to see done to the country, and certainly the implications that has globally as well.
I saw someone comment that it must be the most infamous think tank paper in history.
It's one of the worst, at least.
Before we pivot to joy,
and the fact that he's tried to run away from it, which is of course hilarious. But he has trouble running away from anything, because there's so many. So he's not very good at mitigating what he says and when he says it. So there's plenty of receipts to hold against him.
I mean, I before we started chatting, I did see a clip where he was asked at a press conference he did yesterday about the North Carolina lieutenant governor and what was his view, and he just said, "I don't know the situation," and then walked off.
Even though he's praised the lieutenant governor as the MLK 2.0 and MLK on steroids, and has said what a phenomenal human being he is. Yes, but suddenly he's not familiar with what's happening there. Just as he said today or yesterday that he's not familiar with the charges that have been levied against the mayor of New York City. But he also thinks at the same time that he's being treated unfairly, and that the charges were from many years ago. So he doesn't know anything about the charges, so he claims, but he does know that the charges are unfair. Make this logic happen. It doesn't add up.
But before we pivot to joy, are there any stats or polls worrying you ahead of the election?
I think the polls that worry me is just that the fact that it is still a dead heat between the two candidates, and I think we'll all be watching the results come in on election night pretty anxiously. And I think we'll, unfortunately, based on some of the changes being made to the governance of elections in states like Georgia, we might not have results for many days until after the election.
I've been weirdly obsessed with American politics since I was like a kid. For some reason, I ended up watching Oliver Stone's Nixon when I was like 9 or something. So I did end up staying up the whole night of the 2020 election and pretty much having CNN on for about 3 days. But as I said, there's hope. Although within the margin of error, I do keep seeing Harris posting leads in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, Wisconsin, North Carolina. What reasons do you have to be optimistic about the 5th of November?
Well, I certainly think North Carolina is in play, which a lot of folks did not think it was going to be. Certainly the lieutenant governor has contributed to the reasons why it is. And that gives me hope, because I think North Carolina changes the electoral college math pretty significantly. I'm also hopeful because I think more and more people are engaged in the political process than perhaps ever before. And I'll be curious to see what the numbers look like in the exit polling for how many young people have come out to vote. I think they're going to be the major voting bloc in this election that changes the scope of who wins and who loses. They were significantly important in the midterm election, which typically the sitting president loses a ton of seats in Congress and does really very poorly nationwide. And I think we forget that not long ago, just 2 years ago, we had in that midterm, we were able to stave off some significant losses. And that was largely due to the fact that young people came out in droves to support Democrats. So I'm hopeful on that front as well.
I wasn't so geeky as to stay up and watch the Biden-Trump debate, but immediately after, sort of the next day, I was skeptical about removing Biden from the ticket. Firstly, because of Biden seemed to have this long track record of people assuming he would lose things, like the 22 midterms, like 2020, and then he wins. And then the second thing that cautioned me was how basically no presidential candidate has won the election whose party has either tried to unseat them or force them not to run again. So I've been very surprised at how well Harris... I've long been a Kamala Harris fan, but I've been surprised how seamless that transition is compared to, say, Hubert Humphreys in sort of, 60, or is it 68? Or anything like that. It's just been a complete vibe shift and sort of her making this election a change election, stealing the change from Trump.
Yeah, I agree. I think she's done a lot of, I think she's been able to take the infrastructure that the Biden campaign had already built, which I think is helpful too, and has been able to transform that into a message that she owns, that is hers, but is not squandering the fact that there was already an infrastructure in place across the nation to run a really powerful campaign. And it's clear based on how quickly we've been able to see her take the momentum forward in this election that it's working. It also helps that she had an extremely successful debate against the former president where he walked into every trap she laid, and his impulses, just he can't help himself.
There's also, I'm looking forward to the Vance Walz debate.
Next Tuesday, it'll be fun.
I did see a poll that Walz is more popular than Taylor Swift.
I don't know about that being accurate. That's probably a very inaccurate poll, but
well, it also says JD Vance is one of the most unpopular people in America right now.
Yeah, I mean, certainly. I mean, I think that's another thing. President Trump chose a vice presidential nominee, a running mate that, what you want at worst is for that person not to hurt the ticket. And I think, unfortunately for Trump, Vance has actually hurt the ticket. And that certainly had for many weeks, it wasn't any sort of enthusiasm around what Vance was bringing to the ticket, but rather all the things that he wasn't. It was a huge distraction. And obviously for Trump, who prefers all the attention to be on himself, it was taking away from him certainly as well.
And something that I find frustrating is that despite being almost obsessively following US politics, there isn't really any ways that sort of I can help or do anything. Are there any ways people overseas can help campaign canvas, anything like that?
Well, certainly I know that one of the things that the campaigns have, or the Harris campaign has certainly emphasized, and this was notable at the convention, is Democrats abroad, people who are living overseas, who are registered voters in the United States. We need folks to make sure that they vote as well. I think there's a deadline for requesting the ballot, which unfortunately I don't have off the top of my head. Hopefully that deadline has not come and passed. But folks who are registered to vote in the United States who are living abroad should certainly feel entitled, because they are, to take part in this election and cast their ballots.
And then finally, how's your own campaign going?
It's going well. I'm unopposed, so it's been less stressful than what Vice President Harris is up against. But I am making an attempt at becoming speaker again, which involves getting the opportunity to travel around the state and meet with folks who are either currently serving the legislature or who are running for the first time. And it's been great to get out there, knock on doors, talk to voters, and just hear what folks in my state want to see their government do, what they expect their government to do. And I'm encouraged by the really talented community leaders that we have who have stepped up to run. The legislature is at times thankless. You don't get paid a lot of money to do it. And it's a huge time commitment, but we are very, very fortunate to have some really incredible people running to do, hopefully, once elected, be able to do some really important things to advance the state on issues like housing and childcare and healthcare and education. So I'm looking forward to getting back to the legislature, getting back to work, and tackling some of these challenges.
I wouldn't rest too easy, because there's a guy running for the Conservative Party leadership in Britain called Robert Jenrick, who is very much leaning into Trumpian kind of language. However, when he was running for a position at the student union, he was running unopposed, but he offended so many people that they ran a campaign to reopen the nominations. And he lost to reopen the nominations. So don't rest too easy.
We won't.
Ryan, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. This was awesome.
I want to thank Ryan again for taking the time to talk to me. And thankfully, our conversation wasn't too unsettled by me breaking the news to him beforehand that Maggie Smith had died. Please rate the show and leave comments on whichever platform you're listening on. Guest recommendations would be very welcome. If you want to buy Ryan's favourite book and support independent stores in the UK, check out the Strategy Yarn bookshop page in the show notes. Hope you all tune in again next week.